My name is Steven. I'm a developer at Calamuna out of Oakland, California. You can follow me on Twitter at Bassett.js and also on GitHub, Bassett.js. The slides will be available at the end of the talk. I'll leave it. There'll be a little short link. I want to talk about Grunt, but first it would be good to talk about what Grunt is. Just like the name, it kind of does your Grunt work for you. It helps you do the things you should already be doing. So this image back here is just a screenshot of CodeKit. It's a really great little Mac app that will help compile your CoffeeScript or Sass or whatever you use to compile your assets down. Also, when I'm talking, feel free to interrupt me, ask questions. Let me know if I'm going too fast as well. So it's very similar to that. It's based off of Node.js. It was originally the creator of Grunt based it off of this other build system called Jake. But he had some key differences and created a more robust API, and it really started taking off. It's very fast. It leverages the NPM, which has a really robust package ecosystem, and has been utilized by a ton of open source projects and has been my go-to tool for helping make my job a lot easier and get going quickly. So why would you want to use Grunt? Well, it helps us do the things we should already be doing. Some best practices like abstracting our CSS into Sass, and working in small chunks of code, linting our JavaScript, and compress and minify your CSS and JavaScript for production deployment. It helps us run tests or even build out style guides using tools like KSS. Some common misconceptions about it. I don't need these things for my Drupal project. Well, that's kind of not true. Drupal doesn't really have a great build system yet, and it does handle some asset management, but it won't minify your JavaScript. It won't compile your Sass. And it's a great complement along with it. And getting started is pretty easy. Grunt uses Node.js. I don't know Node. If you can write a little bit of JavaScript, and it's more about just understanding the patterns, and the documentation out there is really easy to get going. I'm not a programmer and don't know how to use the command line. The command line can be a really big barrier, but luckily the interface is really easy. It's just as simple as issuing the command grunt and your task name that you would like to target, and it can go. So for the purposes of this lecture, I created a kind of a sample project to work off of. It's my awesome theme. It has some pretty base things. I have a nice banner SVG logo for the top. I might want to do other things with it. I might have further images. I have my Sass structure. I have my template.php containing all my theme functions and PHP stuff there. So some of these tasks might include concatenating our scripts, linting our JavaScript, or running our unit tests, and then minifying the assets and uglifying it. So steps to get started. First, we're going to need to make sure that we have Node installed on our system. Node can run on pretty much any environment. Super easy to get up and going. You can check it out at nodejs.org, I believe. I'll show you in another slide. Define our project in terms of a package.json. Figure out which plugins and packages we're going to need for these tasks. Then configure the tasks, and then you can run them repeatedly. Once you have it set up, those tasks live inside your project repository and can be shared with your team and is really great for collaboration. So installing Node, is really easy. If you have Homebrew, just brew install Node, or you can just check out go to the Node.js website and download the binary, and it will install in a few steps. You'll also need to define a package.json. So it's very similar to like the module.info or theme.info, but it supplies some metadata about your project for NPM to install. And Node Package Manager delivers your packages and handles the dependencies. It's really excellent at doing that. So this is what a really simple one might look like. It has some basic name, a version. They use semantic versioning for that. I usually just give it a 0.1 and then bump it up as I go. A short description, maybe a main file, especially if you're, I don't know, if it's going to be consumed by another project. You can point it there. You can supply some basic tests some basic commands that you can run. Provide keywords if you want, some author metadata, and you don't need all of this. What's going to be more important about setting up the grunt tasks later is just providing what's needed to run those tasks. So when another teammate gets started, all they have to do is run npm install, and it'll grab all the dependencies and and install it locally. So a really easy way of getting this going is just going to the base of your theme or inside that repo and running npm init, and it'll run this really nice interactive script that will write it out for you, and then you check in that package.json. The other thing you're going to need is the actual command line interface. So all you need to do is run npm install grunt CLI, and that -g means install it so that it's available on my path. So all you need to do is run grunt, and it will go find that. And then it's available globally. So finding grunt plugins, you'll notice all of them here. Pretty much every grunt plugin will start out with grunt-something. And then you can see here that these all have grunt-contrib. That means it's actually produced by the core grunt maintainers. Usually a really good sign, good quality, the ones to go for. Some really common ones might be using Uglify JS. Who's currently using Uglify in their projects to minify? Anyone? No? Okay. Uglify will take your JavaScript code, and it'll get rid of all the white space. It'll take variable names and mangle it, and it'll help reduce the size of the files needed to run, and thus help with front-end performance. JSHint is a really great linting tool, so that can help avoid, forgetting a semicolon in JavaScript, or not following different conventions. QUnit is used for running front-end unit tests, and then watch is probably my favorite. You can run grunt watch, and it'll look at a certain directory, and it'll pull the directory for changes. So it's very similar to like running compass watch or something like that. It'll look for changes and then run those tasks, but it can become really helpful for when you're in development mode. You want it to auto-reload your assets in the browser. But also something worth checking out is just going to the Grunt JS website and going to the plugins directory. They have a ton of great ones, and it'll also sort it by popularity. So it can help you, because there's so many out there, you can find which ones seem to be working well for the community. So if you want to use grunt in your project, you need a grunt file. It sits at the base of the project. So this module.exports is a Node.js way of creating modules to use in other functions. So this is basically just like a wrapper function. It's boilerplate code that you need. So you need to include that at the top of the file. And then you can go ahead and start configuring some basic tasks. This method grunt-init-config is where you're going to start putting your task configuration. So for each of the tasks that you install, so for example, so for example, like the SAS task, you'd go ahead and install it. You'd see that it would add it to your package.json as a dependency. And then if you look at the docs, it'll give you a really good idea of some common config options, and it'll explain the different options that you can use. With each task, so you have like the general plugin, and then below that is just can have global options, and then a sub-target. So for example, like you may have want to compile SAS in a different directory or have different options for that. So maybe not have it be compressed or not include source maps. You can create subtasks to be able to handle the differences between them. So if we're looking here, the theme is the target. The options are the options you can pass in there. The source map is a really cool thing that lets you, it creates a way of, in Chrome developer tools, like find where that style is coming from. So when you inspect it, you can see, it'll actually show you the SAS style sheet where that CSS is being generated from. And then you can define things like a load path, so you can save yourself with the @import blah 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 really long, and it'll auto add those. And then let me scroll here, tiny screen. The files themselves. So this is really important, and there's a few different syntaxes. Files can be defined in a shorthand of destination on the left and source on the right, and there are different patterns for matching that. So you can use like an asterisk as any character, or curly braces. Anyways, I'll show you more later. So right now we're just defining for it to go grab the main file and then put it in my compile directory as my awesome theme.css and get it going. One other thing you have to do is you have to make sure that Grunt knows to grab that Grunt task. So you tell it to go ahead and load that npm task so that it's available.
You're doing that in the grunt file JS?
Yep. So this all exists in the grunt file, and that's a traditional architecture of that, and it can become pretty lengthy. I'll show you another way of working with it. There's another contributed module that allows you to create basically like a grunt folder, and each task you can have like a sas.js, or it supports different file types like YAML or CoffeeScript. And that's something else. Grunt supports CoffeeScript out of the box, so if you're a fan of that, it's a little bit easier and more elegant to work with. So now we have that. And this is kind of important. You need to make sure that you create a default task. So the default task is whatever will run when you just type in grunt. And that's usually, I generally use that for whatever is going to be like the build and deploy step. So I won't do that for like, oh, I want it to watch and compile things and reload it in my browser automatically. And this will build up over time. So it just runs with the simple grunt at the command line, and you're good. But as you can see, with just a single task, it's not really that helpful, because you could have just run SAS and pointed at the two. But you get, the more you add in terms of building in other steps here, it saves you more and more time. And you start to develop these patterns. So I'm going to share another really cool tool. I love this. It's called Autoprefixer. It's awesome. I stopped writing my CSS entirely with vendor prefixes or using mixins to handle that. What it'll do is it'll go check out what browsers you're trying to target and automatically prefix it according to your specifications. So it automatically keeps updated with what's there. So I find it way faster than using Compass. So if I was to do that, I would probably just Google grunt autoprefixer. And the first thing that comes up is grunt autoprefixer. Click on that link. Or I could also go back to the grunt plugin directory. That's another way of finding it. And then I would check out the docs. Again, the docs have really good examples. Usually I would just copy and paste that task and change it as I need. Generally, you can start out with they'll give a simple version, and then they'll provide explanations on what the keys in the JavaScript object literal is. So it'll say like source map, and you change it to true or false, or give it a string of this is what I want to call it, and it'll tell you what you can use there. So for here, this is just coming directly out of their README. They give examples for all this options available at the top that is global, so all the subtasks will inherit it. But then if you look at the single files, the options will be only available within that scope, and then you can point it at specific files and keep going. And as you can see, there are different options for how you want to grab the files. You can dynamically do it. Oh wait, sorry, I'm not scrolling that one. No wonder you can't see anything. So for like multiple files here, the expand and flatten is really nice because it'll, just like it says, it'll expand where it's looking and then flatten it down into a single directory. And it'll match it according to these patterns and then put it into the destination. And you can do things like change the extension on the thing. So, if I'm minifying CSS, I will probably change the extension to .min.css or something like that to help make it a little bit clearer, the format of the code. So now that I kind of have an idea, I'm just going to do a really simple one. In this task, you don't even have to provide a destination. It'll just go ahead and auto-prefix that file, and it'll be done. It'll create a source map as well. And it'll take that input source map and remap it, so it kind of starts building up over time, which is really helpful. And again, you want to load the task. And now you just want to add it. So this grunt register tasks, the first parameter in there is just the task name. The second one can be a description. So I changed the description to compile Sass and auto prefix. And the third are tasks to run prior to it. And then the fourth is optional. You can also pass in a function to do that. So if you wanted to write your own part of the task, go grab something and template it out and do it over here using Node, you can do that. Most people just use it as like an alias for the task. So one could be like grunt register task styles, and you put all of your style stuff there, and then in the default you can refer that alias to the other one. And it's a good way of like keeping it organized in the logic. And so that's pretty helpful, but you still have to go back every time you make a change to the original Sass files and go back to the command line and type in grunt, and it'll do it again. So a way to prevent that is to include the watch task. The watch task is going to look for changes and help us avoid having to type in grunt. So again, we install the task. The structure here is a little bit different. So we have our watch configuration object, the files parameter. So files, I think it should actually, that's a mistake. It should be SCSS dash. Anyways, like star dot SCSS, and that will identify like everything below there, or you can point out a single thing. And then it'll watch those files for changes and then run the corresponding tasks accordingly. One thing to note, I like to configure the watch tasks in really small chunks. If you try and watch a whole directory and run all the tasks, it can overload Grunt, and it's just not very efficient. So tend to separate it out if you can. Something else that's really awesome it can do is it can watch your compiled files and reload it into the browser. And you can either include like the live reload script in your development page, or there's a nice Chrome plugin that will automatically do that. So when you hit save, have it compile, and once it's done compiling, it'll go ahead and show you the changes right there live. So I generally have my code editor in one area, terminal, and then browser right there, and I can just watch it go. Helps out a ton. So just really quickly, I kind of want to go over a few other ones. Does anyone have any questions before I go on? No? Okay. So CSS min, this is a really good example of showing like the pattern matching. So expand means look in all the child directories of the current working directory, which is where I'm putting my CSS, and telling it to match any file below that with a .css, and then that bang in front of it means do not match that. And then make sure to append it with a new extension name of .min.css, and then put it back in there. So that's a good way of making sure that you're not, minifying already minified code unnecessarily. So JS hint. This one's really great. You probably, for any subtask, you probably want it to be the same in terms of putting all of your JS hint configuration inside of a .jshint.rc.json file, which you can set, these are made predefined global objects like Drupal or jQuery. And then you can create subtasks like the grunt file. You'd probably want to tell it to look for that, look for syntax errors there. And then any of your source theme files. Browserify is really sweet. Has anyone used Browserify before? Nope. Browserify is a way of using the Node.js module system inside of the browser. And what it does is you can require, like, let's say you just wanted to have a small interaction. You can write that in a really small function, and then in the index file for that bundle that you'll use in your theme, you just require that, drop down, expand, or whatever inside of that, and that way you don't have this long JavaScript file with a bunch of globals everywhere. It bundles things down. It can do transforms on it. But anyways, it has a nifty grunt plugin. So I'll want to install that. I'll also want to install Browserify shim, which helps take non-common JS compatible things and put it and make it a little bit better, so that you can require, jQuery, even though it's exposed globally, into your theme's JavaScript. And it's really simple. For this, I would just want to take whatever my source, like index file, and it'll look at that file and figure out which other files it needs to find through a AST, sorry, I forget, abstract. Anyways, and then it'll put it into the awesome theme.py package.js. And then luckily you can move that. Browserify will look at the configuration inside of your package.json, so I tend to use put that there. So for Browserify shim, I'll go ahead and define jQuery as global object and Drupal as another core one that I will want to use. So that's helpful. And then you can also use Uglify to finally take your JavaScript and make it tiny. So then you point it. So first we're going to pass in a few options. We probably want source maps again because trying to debug uglified code is hard and not great. I'll probably also want to add some metadata to the top of the file, maybe include today's date, the package name, whatever. And you can define that in a variable. What you're seeing here between the strings in that banner, that's the inline templating that's included with Grunt. So you can pass in strings in configuration this way. As you can also see in the source, it'll take the Browserify theme.js configuration and output it there as well. And I'll probably want to change the extension to note that it's minified. So also just looking at PHP tools, I was able to find a few. There aren't a ton out there. Grunt PHP check style is really helpful. PHP lint was good. PHP unit will be helpful in Drupal 8 as we move over to PHP unit. And there's a really simple grunt drush plugin. So I'll go over a few possible task configurations that we could do. So if we wanted to just check and make sure that we're following Drupal coding standards, you can install, and so there's the coder module that includes Drupal coding conventions in it. And there's instructions on how to set that up. And you can install it with Composer. So in this example, I'm assuming that we installed it via Composer. So I would point it at our template.php, and then I would tell where it can find PHP check style. And then I just want to set it to the Drupal standard. And then you could possibly set up a watch task that every time you hit save, it'll check your template.php to make sure that it's to coding standards or that you didn't make a mistake or forget a semicolon or something like that. PHP lint's very similar. It's a little bit more basic. You probably don't need to run PHP lint if you're doing PHP check style, because PHP check style will also tell you for syntax errors. PHP unit, this would be an example if you were developing with Drupal 8. You could tell it where to find the test classes inside of that directory. You could tell it where to find PHP unit here, and also your Bootstrap testing file, and then tell it that you would like some colored output. Here are just a few drush tasks that you could run. Something I always find I'm doing is telling it to not process CSS and JavaScript. So it would be really easy to set it up here that, when I start a task, set it to, if I wanted to go into development mode, first set it to not process, and then when it was done with that task on exit, turn it off would be possible. So you could do drush, grunt drush colon dis JS CSS, and it'll go ahead and pass that to grunt to drush to execute. Another thing you could possibly do would be watching the template directory for changes, and every time you make a change, instead of manually clearing the theme directory or have it on every page load, reload the theme registry, just have it do it then. Would be a little bit more performant. Or you can have it enable or disable develop themer as well. So there are a few things you can do to use grunt more effectively. One's called load-grunt tasks. So as you saw, every time we included a new task, we had to do grunt load npm tasks. It seemed a little excessive. That plugin helps. Load-grunt-config, that's where you're able to, instead of having all the config exist inside of that giant long grunt file.js, you can separate it out into separate files underneath the grunt file folder. Grunt notify will go ahead and, like, if it finds an error, it'll run like OSX notification or like a growl notification. And then for speed, you can increase efficiency by running grunt concurrent, so you can run multiple tasks at once. Or even better, you can run grunt newer, where it will only process files that have changed since the last time it has run. And a good way of checking to see which tasks take the longest is running time grunt. So I'll go over these a little bit more. So again, you can see how long that gets and kind of pointless. Instead, you can just include that load grunt tasks and pass it the grunt object, and it'll go ahead and pattern match. So any npm module that's installed that starts out with grunt dash something, it'll just automatically assume, I probably need to load this. Even better is load grunt config. Not only will it do all your tasks, but it will also load all your grunt config from a default grunt folder. You can also point it to another folder inside of the config. So for example, if we were going to take our original Sass task, instead of having it be part of this really long JavaScript object, we can just pass it to a small partial file and just simply define the module.exports as a JavaScript object, and you're good to go. So what it'll match according to the task name. So whatever you were calling that original, like Autoprefixer, you would have an Autoprefixer.js or an uglify.js for all your task configuration. And what's also really cool is it will support YAML, CoffeeScript, and JavaScript as well. So if you are not a big fan of vanilla JavaScript, you can use YAML, CoffeeScript. Below is also an example of, instead of having to write out these just lists of other tasks that you want to create under an alias, now your default list can look something as simple as that, a nice clean YAML file. Grunt notify. So this is a really good example. It's showing like all the notifications I got using, I think that's growl itself. It will also like fall back to using the notification center inside of OSX if you're on a Mac. And I think it does a whole bunch of other support there. Grunt newer. This one would only run against files that have changed. I think this would be particularly applicable for any tasks that take a long time, like image minification or like SVG min. That can take a while, and you only really need to run it once, right? So this would help to only run that task every time the file actually changes. And then concurrent. Any tasks that can run at the same time, like you can go ahead and start the first part of your Sass task and JS hint and Browserify all at the same time. And that'll help. And then time grunts, super easy. All you have to do is require that plugin, again, in the same function. And when you run your task, it'll go ahead and tell you how long it took. So you can see, and obviously the concurrent task, I think that was like 6 other tasks running at the same time, so that took the most time, but that's kind of expected. So those are all really great tools. And then probably the question of the day is, what about this new hot thing called Gulp? So Gulp just came out and probably, has it been out for like 5 months or so? I think About so. Yeah, it's pretty new. It's really pretty new. It has a fundamental difference in how it handles files. So it uses the Node file stream API. So instead of writing it to disk and then reading it again, it'll pass it from one task to the other. It also tries to encourage people to write their own tasks using core Node functions. So Node has a file management task it has a file system API that you can use directly, or you could use Node Sass, which is a port of the libsass library, which is quite a bit faster than the original Ruby version. And you can write your own task and just follow that module's API to build that out. So to see what it would look like, I also want to mention that which one do I use? Just don't have the fear of using the wrong tool. I think it's more important that you understand, that you get behind the idea of automating it and seeing the benefit behind it. And a lot of the same principles apply regardless. And so here's a really simple example of a Sass task. So you need to first require gulp itself, and then you need to require each task. And you can call it whatever you want. So instead of calling it gulp Sass, it's just called Sass. And so it's this variable now I can work with. Then to register a task, I pass it in a string and then a function. You can also, before that, you can have other tasks that are required to run before that task, which is really helpful. So if you need to, before you minify CSS, you may want to run the Sass task. That can be helpful. So then you point it to your source SCSS files, and as you can see, now you pipe it to the original task. Inside of that function call for Sass, you can pass in an object for configuration. So change the style or an include path, or be able to have maps, source maps print out, and then you pipe it to your destination, and that's essentially how it works. So that's the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any further questions? Yeah.
So this is a great intro. Thank you. But I always hear about Bower along with Grunt.
Oh yeah, and they work really great together.
No clue what it is. Can you?
Yeah. So Bower is trying to. There's a little bit of controversy around it because some people think Bower is not a real package manager. It tries to be as unopinionated and have a flat dependency scale. So a good example, let's say you wanted to use Bootstrap, right? So you can have that as a dependency. And then Bootstrap would also require jQuery, right, to run. And then let's say you had this fancy button slider thing, and it requires a different version of jQuery. How Node would handle it is it would pull down two different versions of jQuery. Bower refuses to do that. It tries to find a resolution between the two. So Bootstrap probably requires 1.8 something, right? And let's say this other fancy slideshow thing requires 1.5. Then you can tell it how to resolve that dependency. Maybe 1.7 is all that's really required. And then it'll place it inside of your just a Bower components. And the way that you can consume that is totally unopinionated. I mean, one way of doing it would just be, copying a file into your build directory and just including it in your HTML. Or you could use it with something like Browserify, where it will actually, you can require that in there. It'll bundle all your scripts together and manage the dependencies. Or something like require JS, which is another module system. And they work really well together. There's another tool out there. I've been playing around with using Yeoman. What it'll do is it'll take in user input at the command line and scaffold out a decent project with like saying defaults and give you some base tasks and install stuff from Bower. And that's a really nice way of not having to check in those source library files and having some way of consuming it. You can even like download just little Sass files. Like there's a nice little project out there just called BTN, like buttons, BTNS, and it gives you a nice like set of Sass files that you can use for nice buttons. It's a nice way of working. Anyways, but yeah, the tutorial on Grunt JS is really helpful. It'll also go into the file matching thing. I think that was the hardest part about starting up. So when you're setting up your first few tasks, I would really recommend, again, just going to the individual task, the individual plugin, and look at their README and kind of scroll to the bottom. They usually put the examples at the bottom, and you can start out with like the most basic task and go from there. I wish I would have started using this grunt load tasks or load config thing, this guy, because I started noticing that my grunt files were getting ridiculously long. It just felt like a giant JavaScript object, and you had to worry about the brackets and the colons and stuff like that. So that's really helpful. And it's a nice way of like being able to include, like reuse those tasks in other things. Because if you can design your tasks to be really modular and kind of have like a system for where you put things where, it could be really pluggable. There's some pretty, go ahead.
Is Drupal 8 going to say more functions that would perform some of these tasks?
No, not really. No built-in. The one thing that will change is like they'll have a standard for JS hint. So they'll have a standard .js hint file. So that's kind of nice. But there's still not going to be, there won't be like a grunt file at the base to perform some of these tasks. Unfortunately, some other projects have started including that. I help maintain Calotheme. In the source of Calotheme, we have a ton of these tasks that you can look at. We're also looking at doing a subtheme generator real soon. And I think Omega in the recent version also has started shipping with grunt tasks included. So it's definitely starting to happen. And I think Snugug has been doing some work with with Yeoman and developing generators for doing stuff like that. Cool.
What do you do for websites that you guys build? Do you include all this stuff in a Git repo for your project, or do you?
Yeah, it's a little, so we struggle with this. Because ideally I would like to have the theme put into its own GitHub repo, because it's almost its own separate thing. It kind of becomes a catch-all for the front end in Drupal, unfortunately. But because we use Pantheon and they don't currently support submodules, there's some thoughts about how we can include a build step. We have to check in the assets as they're built. The best solution I've found currently, though, is if you do need to have a theme in there, there's this nice Grunt plugin that you can set up to set up a pre-commit and post-commit hook so that you can have it, like, you commit the files you want to, and then it'll do your full build step so you don't accidentally commit in, like, fully commented out, or, the debug comments and the CSS and like all this unminified code, which you don't really want, and just automatically commit that in. And when I resolve commits, like if there's ever like a merge conflict and some like a mild stuff, it's not really a big deal, because I know like if there's not a merge conflict in the source files, it doesn't really matter. Like that's just what happens to ship, So. But ideally, it would be best to have it treated as a separate thing.
So pulled up the projects that have them in it and I've been looking through as you've been talking. And I noticed the first project that we put grunt on, the grunt file and package.json are inside of the theme directory. Is that technically correct to do?
You can have it be wherever you want,
Okay.
but that's going to be where your configured task relative to. So like if I put it all the way at the Drupal base level, like then I would have to configure, like I would either have to set the current working directory every time to that theme, and then like configure which files to look for and do things to, which isn't so great. Yeah, so generally it's wherever you want to be working most out of. So I usually put it just in the theme that I'm working with.
Then I could, it was a nuisance to have to go in all the way into the theme to do it, but you did compile depending on where you were.
And with Gulp, it's a little bit easier to include like tasks because you can use the common, well, I guess you might be able to do it as well. I haven't played around as much with Grunt using this, but when I've been starting to use Gulp, you can, you know, put in these like sub-module tasks. So you can do the module.exports and put in a function and pass in Gulp and, you know, have the tasks build up. So one possible thing is you could have like a really simple Gulp file at the base of your project that goes and imports the actual Gulp file inside your theme. So you can run Gulp from the base of your Drupal project and not have to worry about it. That might be a really easy way of dealing with it. Yeah, no problem. And I'll go back to the front. So yeah, you can get the slides here on my GitHub repo. Cool. You can clap. Thank you.